Hi everyone, welcome to We Belong Education podcast. I'm Saurubh and I'm joined with my co-host Helen. How are you doing, Helen?
I am very good. How about yourself?
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm really happy because of our special guest today who is joining us. We have been waiting for this podcast for a bit. Sarah Louise, how are you doing, Sarah? Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a busy day, but I'm so excited to be in this space with you now.
Yeah. Well, I look, those who are listening to us, they may already know about you, and maybe I would not do justice to your introduction as I introduce you, but I'm going to try and I'm going to fail, and then you will help me to fill those gaps. So, Sarah, I have known Sarah as a Facebook friend first, and then as someone who influences Facebook groups, social media groups by her expert comments. Sarah runs a Sarah Louise consultancy. She's a lifelong learner. I know why. I mean, there are many ways you can measure somebody's lifelong learning habits, but Sarah has just been inducted into a PhD program. Yes, Sarah? If I'm not
I
wrong.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a PhD mom, she calls herself every now and then. Mama, is it PhD mom or mama?
Mama. Yeah.
Mama, there you go. So see, I follow your Facebook. So Sarah Louise's career highlights has been speaking at many national conferences all across Australia, but she's also a recipient of ACEL, New Voice in Early Childhood Scholarship, and also AGEC Fellowship in 2024. And she explores the concept of professional love. Someone, I'm speaking for you also, Helen, someone who loves their profession. We are very interested in learning about this professional love. But what have I missed, Sarah? Please tell me.
So, can I just jump in? I just want to tell everyone that's listening at home. Sarah, you don't know this, but when we was first discussing starting our podcast, you were actually the first guest I told Saurubh I wanted to get on here. And it was mainly because, I mean, same as Sarah, following along for a while, really great content, but also having heard you speak at conferences, this concept of professional love is so interesting to me. So yeah, I just wanted to tell everyone at home that while this is, I think, this will be number 5 podcast, Sarah was actually the first person that Sarah and me discussed about getting on.
And also because of the timing of that. Like, do you want to say about that? Which was kind of a
Well, we
cliche
were
thing.
looking at a Valentine's release date for our first one. I went, oh, wouldn't that be so
So good
cute to
about
talk about
talk about
professional love
love,
around Valentine's Day? But yeah, we weren't
but we are
organized
not
enough
that
to get it there.
effective. We were not that effective. Our lights were not set up, podcast was not set up, so we couldn't just get it done. But Sarah, I'm sure that there's so much more that you do than what my words have just expressed. Please, if there's anything I've missed, I would love to know.
Thank you. I mean, it's such an honor to be in this space. And, I hope I do justice to the concept of professional love, which obviously comes from Jules Page in the UK. But I'm really conscious about making it work for our context and talking about it like that. And when I think about context, I do think about all the different lenses and spaces that I'm currently working in and have worked in over the last kind of 22 years. Gives away my age a little bit when I say that, but I'm really proud to have been in the sector for 2 decades now. And I am an early childhood teacher. And so I do actually still work in an occasional care setting in my local LGA at the moment, which is just such a beautiful, wonderful experience because it means that I still get to be part of a team and I still get to have those deep pedagogical conversations often. But it also means I'm staying connected with children and families and I'm seeing firsthand what the challenges are, how, cost of living is affecting people, what schooling systems look like for children that transition out of our spaces into other spaces. So that's been really great to keep doing that. I'm also lecturing at the moment at Melbourne Polytechnic here in Naarm in both the Bachelor of Early Years program, which is a 0 to 12 course, and the Bachelor of Early Childhood, which is a 0 to 5. Obviously, being an early childhood specialist, predominantly I'm working in that Bachelor of Early Childhood. But it's really interesting as well to speak to students who are really passionate about both early childhood, but also the early years of primary school as well, and bridging that gap. And yes, like you said, I'm running my own consultancy at the moment. That's been going for almost 6 years now. And I love being able to support services across Australia. So I'm doing a lot of work with rural and regional services now in both Victoria and New South Wales, which is really exciting. But being able to connect with people, even, across New Zealand, doing webinars and chatting with people, it's such a joy. I mean, I love what I do, and I'm sure we'll talk about how much we love our sectors as we go through. But yeah, I've been so blessed to experience so much in this sector, boards and committees and things like that as well. So yeah, I mean, you can see my LinkedIn profile. It's all there. It's all transparent and black and white. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, because you just touched on then working with rural services, and we got a comment this week from Cherie from Claremont Daycare. I still get really excited when I hear that people listen to this podcast. It's like, wow. But this one was a big one for myself and Sarah, because when we were discussing the idea of why we would do a podcast, one of Sarah's really big points was it's a way of being connected. And so Cherie highlighted that being in a rural service, it's really hard to get quality PD in her area, and that her team have been using our podcast as PD, which is really exciting for us. But it also made me think, Saurabh, after Kylie's podcast, I want to highlight about that connection. We're actually coming from 3 different states right now.
Yes, we are.
So I wanted to highlight I'm in Sydney on Gadigal land, but I was at work today on Bidjigal land. But yes, so Sarah, what land you're coming from us? You're coming to us from Queensland, but what land are you on?
I'm coming from Turrbal land, and this land was very well known for hunting and fishing. So
Wow.
right next to Hamilton, which is now known as Hamilton. This area is quite popular.
And I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people here in now known as Melbourne.
Wow.
There you go, 3 different states, and that kind of exciting to me that
Talking about
we can
connection.
come
Talk about
together and
connection.
have these conversations.
When you mentioned something about that comment we received from Cherie, I got to work with Cherie 2-3 months ago when I went to Claremont. Actually, that's where that service is from, and she had said the same thing to me then. And when I said to Helen that we should do podcasts, you never know when you're doing these, whenever you're taking a big decision that you think it's a big decision, but it's made up of those small conversations you've had in the past. And these are some of the conversations that we keep accumulating, and thought, why don't we just put it all together? And that's, again, I want to honor the time our guests spend. So Sarah, your influence directly to children while working with them, and then working with the future leaders, and also working with the current leaders doing conferences, and also you're a part of ECA committee. I know because I'm a part of here, ECA committee here. And all of that is these small things which keep adding into, and that constitutes to your commitment of, if people didn't know that you loved your profession now, by now they should know that you love your profession. Tell us about this professional love.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting concept that I came about through my master's. So I was doing a unit on infants and toddlers, and one of the readings was Jules Page's characterizing professional love. And I realized that I wasn't challenged by this notion. It just made perfect sense to me. And it was interesting because a lot of the people in my cohort were actually really challenged by this concept of love and its impact in the early years space. So I read literally everything Jules has ever published or put online, every video she'd done, anything I could find, I just consumed it. And I was so taken aback by how simple a concept it was when she explained it. And so, I might butcher it, and I apologize, Jules, if you're listening. Professional love is really this idea of strong reciprocal relationships between a triangular kind of model of parent or caregiver, the educator, and the child. So it's this idea that there is genuine reciprocity, there is genuine collaboration, genuine understanding, genuine care, that all three of these parties actually play within the context of an early years setting. Now, Jules's work is predominantly with infants and toddlers, but my work here in Australia, particularly working with Birrali Max, which is an Aboriginal controlled organisation in Tamworth, New South Wales, kind of thinks about this in a bit more of an expanded concept and thinking about it from more of a kinship model and the role that community plays in also creating a little bit of that scene as well around professional love. So it makes perfect sense when you think about these beautiful relationships and the equality that exists within them. But there will always be, I think, that challenge of using the term love when it comes to children, especially when we think about things that have been in the media this week, over the last couple of years even, we've had some pretty significant child safety issues in early childhood. And there is this worrisome conflation between love and dangerous behaviour with children. But what professional love really talks about is that love is not a romantic love. It's not a sexualized love. This is professional love. It is a love that exists within the context with permission from the family, with permission from the child, and with permission from the educator.
I think it's really interesting because I think the first time I heard you speak about this was at a conference with Stella Stead. And to me, I think similar to you, like it was so good hearing, but also not a huge extension on some of the thoughts I already had. And like, we had Kylie Captain on the other week, and I cared for her son when he was little. And, I still care greatly about every single child I've ever, I'm rooting for them. I want them to do great. I love seeing when, someone's graduated from study, or, recently Kylie's son even bought his first house, and I was proud, even though, I'm probably that distant educator that he doesn't remember so much. I'm really proud to watch. And there is a love, and I often see someone will get on like a Facebook group and they'll be like, I heard another educator tell the child they loved them. How can I address this? Blah, 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 blah. And I think that's sad to me that people can't understand that there can totally be love, a platonic love, a love within how you respect and how you connect. It's got nothing romantic to do with it. It's not child safe standards. It's just a way of being and working.
It kind of brings an interesting point, because on Facebook you can leave a love comment or a love reaction. You can love a chocolate, you can love an ice cream, you can love a flavor or a color. But when it comes to love towards a child or love towards the child's progress, it seems that it has to go through some sort of validation.
I think that's where the theory comes into it. I think that's where we start to see where Jules was really influenced by attachment theory. And that, in order for children to grow and thrive, they need to be in those safe, loving relationships. That's what attachment theory is built on. And so when we're removing the child from the home environment where hopefully they're receiving that attachment style love care, we remove them from that and we put them in a setting, an early childhood setting. We still want them to have that extension of attachment theory, so that all those beautiful learning outcomes can still happen and still occur for that child.
Yeah. You also mentioned that some people were challenged by this and some people were not challenged by this. Like for you, it made sense, but you still went on and consumed and the content there. Were they challenged by the notion that we can't say love, but we can love? Because there's love always present.
Yeah, there is love always. I think what the biggest challenge was, one of Jules's original pieces of work was looking at the family relationship with the service and knowing that those families genuinely wanted love for their child without actually using the word love. So a family will never say, I want you to love my child, but they will say, I want you to care for my child and I want you to treat them like your own while they're here, and I want you to make sure that they're fed and clothed and their nappies changed. So what they're saying are approximations of love. And I think what challenges people is this notion that, I think it's that professionalization of our sector. And I know this is a very contentious time to be saying this, but I think we can have both. Being a professional doesn't mean that we stop the care factor of our work. It doesn't mean being a professional means that we distance ourselves from holding a child when they're sad, when, comforting a child that, is sad that their parent has left for the next 8 hours and they're not going to see them and they've got no concept of time. What does 8 hours even mean? For them, it could be they're gone. So I think that challenges people to go, but I'm a professional. I'm here for early learning. And we've seen that kind of development over the last 20, perhaps more, but at least 20 years. We've seen this real shift away from the care factor of our work to children are doing something and we're taking the photos and we're presenting the learning, which is great, but we can learn through those relationships as well. And I think in the discussions around professionalism, that's got a bit lost. So when we talk about professional love, it does have that kind of challenging of our professional identity attached to it. And so it's when we get into the theory and when we start to really break it down, what does this actually look like? It's the things that we want for children anyway. It's the stuff that deep down, this is why we work with children, but it's putting that word on it. And as soon as you put the word love on it, you've got to start to do some real thinking.
You're right.
I didn't think I was going to go here today, but I kind of actually think it's necessary, and I'm confident with the people in the room that, we can have a good discussion about this. But, you talked about what's going on at the moment. You talked about our professionalism coming into question. And for those that don't know what we're talking about, I think our profession has been hit pretty hard this week there was a Four Corners episode and it shoved us into the spotlight. And, for some services, rightly so. But what I've felt really heavy this week, and something that I think I've struggled with a little bit is, those educators and services that are generally doing a really great job, and the thought of maybe now they're going to try and edit some of those great things they're doing because they're concerned, or I think we need to say, it's a no-brainer. People listening to this are probably in our sector, and that's why they're listening to it. And I just want to say to those people that are generally doing a great job and working really hard, I really hope you don't change the way you're, doing something because you're scared about the child safe standards or repercussions, because no one in their right mind is questioning you. Well, people are, but people who know what they know about our sector, it's not you that they're questioning, it's someone else. It's other services or people, but unfortunately it feels like it's all of us this week. And I said to Sarah actually earlier in the week, I said, I've had to have a bit of time off social media because I can't see it. And I know that's my privilege not to look at it, but it does feel really heavy, and it is a concern now that we're going to see people even withdrawing back that professional love even more so, because they're now worried on what parents are going to see.
But building upon what Helen is talking about, which recent news, this is also a time for leaders to step up and say, look, the things which are going good continue. In fact, we grow more. This is a time where we show good work. See, things which come, it's only a news if it's not a news if it is not sensation. Okay, so sometimes bad news make it to the news. Good news, nobody knows about that.
Yeah, no, we don't hear about all those good news stories that are going on.
Services which are doing such amazing job. As Helen said, she's that far distant educator. They may not even know her, but she's still passionate about them buying their first house, getting married, or all of that. So this is quite important time for us to not point fingers at each other, but perhaps bring all the learning and even work slightly harder towards it. And I'm glad that although we were planning on doing it for Valentine's Day, that we're doing it now, that this is the time that we have that professional love conversation, because our profession is hit. So why don't we talk about professional love now? This is the time to show more love than pointing fingers. Sarah, what is your comment on that?
Well, I was thinking, Helen, about what you were saying, that, people are going to start to withdraw from these conversations and from the experiences. Nicole Tallarico and I actually spoke at the ECA conference last year about the relationship between professional love and child safety. Nicole is a child safety expert here in NAM. And what we looked at was the relationship between that reciprocity, that leaning in, that being with child, actually creates a safer environment, because when the child has that beautifully professionally loving relationship with an educator and with the family, they're actually more likely to disclose if something's going on. They're
Yeah.
more likely to feel that
Yes.
they can say, you know what, actually, I don't want a hug right now because I'm
Mm.
not feeling it.
Mm.
A day later, they're all about the hugs. But
Mm.
they'll actually feel like they're in a much safer place to be able to express those body boundaries, to express their distaste around something, unconsensual or something, or stuff that's happening potentially outside of the service as well.
Mm.
So, in a way, this idea of professional love actually creates a stronger child safety environment for
Mm.
children in early learning services, because we know the child and the family so much better.
I just side note, just because you've just brought it up, for anyone that is listening, if they want to read a great book about child safe, Nicole's book is amazing. If I could run downstairs and get it from my office, I would. But Sarah Louise, can you please tell our listeners what it's called if you remember? If not, we'll promise we'll link it later. But it's an
Absolutely.
amazing book, and it's such a good, like I highly recommend it to anybody who is wants to further their knowledge on this stuff.
Absolutely. It's called Asserting a Culture of Child Safety, and
Mm.
it's available through Amber Press, but also through Nicole's Facebook page and website as well.
Mm.
Perfect. I'm glad that we got to talk about that book also. There's one thing I would like to pose that as a question to both of you.
Mm.
Um, and right now I'm putting a hat of a male educator,
Mm.
who a male educator who aren't in many numbers, especially
Mm.
when talking about early childhood, oosh, osh, even in teaching sometimes we don't have
Mm.
many. There have been cases which have demonized male educators at
Mm.
workplace, and now that we are in this situation, what might you advise, or what have you already seen happen, and
Mm.
how have you promoted professional love among males working with children?
A few years ago, when I was working for a different service and having quite a lot to do with the early years service, um, and my way isn't always the best way, but I'm just going to share with what happened and what I did. We unfortunately did have an accusation made against an amazing, amazing male ECT. And while, yes, I had to do my due diligence and I had to do investigation and make the reports that you have to make, which doesn't feel good, I also was really careful to make sure that I really backed that educator. That he knew what I thought of his work, and he knew, that I was supporting him, because and I can't even begin to imagine how he felt, because the accusation was horrible and it was so unfounded and there was no way that it ever happened. But of course, we had to investigate. And
Mhm.
it was horrible. So all I could do as someone managing him was really just keep checking in on him, keep that message going that I really value his work and I value him as an educator. And it got to the end where, we could prove that there was nothing, and but also standing firm. And I don't know, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was really firm in the fact that we weren't going to change our practice
Right.
because of one unfounded accusation.
Yeah.
So also just to also back him to go, I'm not going to bend to, some inflated sensationalism, because that's what it was in this case, thank goodness.
Mhm.
But just also not changing our practice to show that we backed him and we trusted him, and all of everything was in place for it to be a safe space.
Yeah.
So that's my advice: is just try and back your male educators as much as you can, and I don't know, be an ear, a sounding board.
I think it's good. Again, you mentioned that point. Well, leadership comes into action. There's so much, even the conversation that we are having with Sarah today. How do you filter this down? Is it you just listen to the podcast and then interpret it, or do you listen to the podcast and have a discussion with your team? Have a critical discussion with your team. What do you
I
think, Sarah?
think there's definitely space for critical discussion. I mean, about any topic, really.
Yeah.
But I think this one a lot more so because for a lot of people, they're going to have to work through some of their own feelings about love and relationships and closeness and what that means. Because we're not necessarily talking about touch when we talk about professional love. Some children want to be cuddled, some children don't. So I think it's really important to make that distinction as well, that we're not saying professional love is about kissing children, picking them up and hugging them. And actually, it's the opposite. It's about asking before you do anything to the child, whether it's a nappy change or holding their hand or patting them on the back, and making sure that consent is a really strong part of the culture. But I think going away, and even, I mean, a lot of Jules Page's work is publicly available, so there's no kind of paywalls or anything. And her work, while it is academic work, is actually very accessible. She's written a few blogs for ECA The Spoke as well. So there's lots of resources out there that you can utilise alongside this podcast and other podcasts that Jules has been on, to start a conversation with the team about what are we comfortable with? What are our relationships with families? What do consensual relationships with children look like in every age group? Because it's going to be very different as well if you're working with 0 to 2s than if you're working with school-age children. Those conversations around consent are going to be vastly different. So thinking about the concepts behind professional love and I guess the kind of theory around attachment as well, ethic of care and those sorts of things, and what does that look like within the context of your setting? Because working with Vera Max in Tamworth, that context is wildly different to where I work in a metro-based occasional care setting where people are dropping off for, you know, between kind of 5 to 8 hours a day compared to a full long day program. So creating that kind of contextual space around the work through critical reflection and through reading and discussion and thinking over and over and over, that's where this magic's going to start to happen.
Yeah. Also, this is just a starting point. Maybe people might have never heard about this concept. We have all heard about consent, but yet then there is the layers of, there's a depth to everything that we are talking about here. It is about now educators, parents, anyone thinking about education, or any other listener to go away and do their own research and perhaps write us an email, just like we get to know, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm grappling with this. And I often say in my workshop that when people argue or disagree or agree, it actually creates depth in the conversation. Otherwise, I can just hold my clicker and speak for 2.5, 3 hours and come home. And that's fine. I got paid. You got your payment. I'm done. But when people say, what about this? What about that? Even if they disagree with what I'm saying initially, it allows me to go deeper into what I actually meant by that. Because sometimes we can get lost in syntax. Sometimes linguistically speaking, we just go on the word because it might sound like what you've heard before, and then you just go on. So this critical reflection, we keep talking about it, and people may feel that critical reflection is that trauma word for many, but it's actually.
But I think I actually had a conversation in the office today. Again, we're talking about four corners, but I was talking about with some of my team about this is why I often feel we need to really look at how we communicate with our parents, how we share information with them. And comes back, Sarah, you've talked about a few times throughout our podcast with, you know, when you're wanting to take a parent on a journey with you, share what you're reading, share what you're researching, share what you're critically reflecting on. And I think in this time, it's really important because if you say to your parents, hey, we've just come across this idea, I was going to say critical love. No, professional love.
We can talk about that too.
Critical love. We've just come across this concept of professional love. We've started some research. We want to share some information with you. I think in this time where parents do have that lens on and they're really trying to look at what we're doing, that's going to help them actually. I mean, I don't know, but I think me as a parent, if I got some information on this is what my educators are reflecting on, I'd be like, oh my goodness, this is really timely in this time where, you know, bad stories are being shoved down my throat in the media. I really like to hear that my service is reflecting on this. And, you know, also ask parents for feedback. We're looking at this bit of research. Tell us what you think.
And also high expectations of families, right? We do that for children. But it's high expectations for our families too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, when we are talking to the families, and I'll just again create depth in when we are talking to families, we are not bombarding them with, hey, I just stumbled upon this news article. Now you need to read it
Mm.
to understand what we do. Again, there's content and there's quality of that content. So, by the way, I'm just saying that our quality is so good in podcast. That's what I'm trying to say. But I also want to add something over here. So, when you are sharing with people, share the depth of what you're learning. So, I'm going to just create a depth in this conversation right now. I'm going to ask and see where we go with this. Okay. Um, Sarah, you mentioned something about Jules Page work on professional love founded on attachment theory. How is your own experience of attachment theory? What is something that you really like about it? And what can educators do now, having heard this word attachment theory? Again, because they might think attaching something to something, but it's a theory. There are so many types of attachment. I would love to know what you think of that. Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you brought that up because I recently completed Circle of Security parenting facilitation training. And it completely transformed what I was thinking about attachment theory. Because for me, being a mum, so I very much ground my parenting in an attachment style of parenting. I keep my children really close, and in order to have them take risks and be out in the world, I do that by providing a really safe, secure base for them. And for me, that kind of attachment was probably, I mean, I love my children to pieces. And so I keep them really, really close and on that kind of short leash, and I really struggle with letting them go. But
Mhm.
when I did the Circle of Security training, it kind of forced me to think about the fact that when we're providing that safe base, children are more likely to go out and do things in a calculated, safe way while still being risky. So, still climbing a tree, but figuring out how far they can climb. They
Right.
will still go out, 3, 4, 5 meters, toddle away when they're little, look back, make sure you're still there, go a little bit further to see just how far they can push that
Mhm.
boundary. And so attachment theory for me really started to transform beyond just a relationship that, you like me, I'm the one that can comfort you, in a setting. I'm the one that can give you your bottle, make you, get you to finish it. It opened up my thinking to being actually, this is about how children move through their world, how they
Yeah.
experience their world, starting from a safe place. So
Mhm.
that attachment for me is not necessarily about the physical doings of caregiving, but the emotional doings and that emotional kind of expansion that children can experience as they move further away from us, knowing they can come back at any time.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It wasn't about just the proximity, about
Yeah.
the distance, physical distance, but it's more to
Mm,
about the context within which those apparent risks were taken. Like I would
yes.
love to translate this into Hindi and give it to my mom to say, "Where were you when I was climbing that wrong tree, mom?" But but I
She
know for
was
very
using some other
some other,
developmental theory, which was risk and reward, and
she
I'm
was
sure you
using a
learned that.
broom theory that if you don't come home by this time, you're gonna get a whack. And I did always come back on time. So um no, but my parents, they had their own way. But listening to Sarah right now, my parents had their own way about providing that safe place because
Mm.
even though I went away, I knew that I can come back home and I am gonna come back home. And one word keep is resonating with me right now as we are speaking, and it was firstly consistency.
Mm.
That because it was always there for me, the care, and yeah, I just knew that, and certainty that it wasn't unsafe for me. Nothing was a surprise. 7 o'clock means 7 o'clock. It was a, and I feel for children that when they don't have that certainty because of n number of
Mm.
reasons. We have many factors. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone at the moment, but educators provide that certainty.
Mm.
Right. So now the children taking risks at your service, that certainty that there's an educator there, who I can go back to, professional love. Because children often say, I love you. Like it's so easy for them to say, I love you. And with that professional love founded on attachment theory, um, brings me to my other question. Where can people learn more about attachment theory?
It's a good question. So the circle of security training is excellent. So whether you go and do the facilitator training yourself or get someone like myself or somebody else to come in and train the team,
Okay.
that's a great starting point. Outside of that, I mean, if you Google attachment theory, you will
Yeah.
find any number of
Mm,
pieces of information out there. And, YouTube is fantastic for people who love
mm,
to watch a video and connect in that way as well.
mm,
Um, but I mean, for me, it's reading. It's finding those articles if you've got access to libraries and
mm.
things. Librarians will help you find information.
Yeah.
We've got this free resource at our disposal.
Yeah.
So the more we can
You
read and the
just
more we
proved your
can.
age then, Sarah.
What are you talking about?
Go
I
to the
said,
library,
I
guys.
said YouTube first, or is it
So
TikTok now? I don't know. Yes.
putting
Definitely TikTok.
asking Helen this question about attachment to Helen, being a proud mother of awesome children. How, do you relate right now as you're listening to all of this? How do you relate yourself to that attachment theory or
Mm,
professional love at home?
mm. Oh, deep questions for Friday night, Sarah.
Well,
Um,
see, this is
Look.
how committed we are, people. We record on Friday with three different
I
states.
think I was a little bit like Sarah Louise, because all of my kids are older now. My youngest is 19, but when my kids were quite young, it's a bit similar in people often used to refer to them as my ducklings because they were always following me everywhere, and I think just from some past experiences of my own and deciding how I wanted my own family to be, you know, strong emotional bonds and secure emotional bonds were really important. And, we know that if there's not that strong foundation, that then, the result of that is children then have issues developing socially, emotionally, all those things. So just my biggest I suppose, goal as a parent was just to create the safest place I possibly could within my household. And, just to pat myself on the back a bit, we must be doing a good job because we can't get rid of any of them and they're all
I
still
was
living
just
at
gonna,
home.
I was gonna say they're
So,
still they're still following you everywhere, Helena. They still are following you everywhere. Uh,
But see, this for me, this is why we need professional love in our early childhood spaces. Like,
mm,
this is why it actually can't be non negotiable because, Helen, for your children, they experienced that strong emotional bond at
mm,
home. But we
yeah,
know that there's more and more and more children entering our spaces that are coming from homes that aren't safe,
mm,
that aren't emotionally stable, that
mm,
perhaps don't actually have consistent caregivers
mm,
for them. We have to be the ones
yeah,
to
mhm.
do that because there's a big gap. And we know those lifelong trajectories are impacted by the lack of emotional connection in
mm.
early.
I was
Uh,
actually thinking about that as you were talking, Sarah Louise, because I have spent a lot of time talking about children with trauma and trying to help educators understand that, and this is in an out of school hours care context, but for some kids in out of school hours care, we are the safest place they're ever going to be.
yeah.
And unfortunately, what we find over and over again is the more safe a child often feels, the more louder that behavior is in communications. That if behavior is communication, the more louder it is that things are not great.
Yeah.
And they want to test you and see. Like I literally just said this week when we were looking at a certain scenario, I said that child is testing because unfortunately they had the experience that a lot of their key people that they should have in their lives are not with them.
Yeah.
And so now they're going to push those educators to see how hard can I push you to see because everyone leaves me. So I'm going to see if you leave me as well. And when you were talking, Sarah, I was really thinking, wow, I hope some educators understand the great work that you're doing by creating that security so that the children don't miss out on that development.
Yeah, and I just want to add for educators, and although we say educators, we mean by anyone who is an adult right now. Okay, so because we all were once a child and we have children all around us. There are two things that are happening in this podcast, and we've mentioned this a few times now. We've mentioned the word theory a lot. So sometimes people listen to theory and it it seems like, oh, it's off-putting, especially for those who are absolutely brand new to world of education or working with children because they've just finished their degree and last thing they want to talk about is theory, theory, theory. Or sometimes people talk about theories a lot, but not the application of that. So
Mm.
theory is just confirming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, or please add your own voice to it. When we are saying theory here, it's just another way to say a
Mm.
perspective created by someone. We looked at it, we validated it, we wrote a book on it,
Mm.
people read it, people tried it, and then we thought, it's not working, let's add something to it. It's in a back and forth process. And no one theory looks the same at different services. So you
Mm.
could have a theory about attachment look different to one service to the other service. So please don't think that you have to think in a certain way. Theory just allows you to expand what you already know and it gives you a framework to think, but that doesn't mean it puts you into that framework that you can't come out of. So there are many
Mm.
theories that you can look at. And I like how Sarah Louise, you mentioned about people can learn about attachment theory from various aspects. I learned attachment theory firstly from YouTube. Then I learned it from educational psychology book behind me. And then I learned it through through my friend's circle because my friend is a psychotherapist. So in those conversations, I did it to that. So again, the theory got introduced to Sarah Lewis to us quite differently. How do you two, what do you think about it? Did I cover the point on theory and practice? Just checking.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. I think the philosophical approach of the service is going to mediate that theory. So
Mhm.
Mm.
a theory is just an idea. It's just another way of looking at it. Like you say, it's a perspective.
Mm.
The application of it in context
Yeah.
that actually matters. And I get a little bit gobsmacked when we've got documentation at the bottom. We write Piaget, and I'm like, yes, but what was it about
That's why I
Piaget?
just wanted to add
That
that to that.
you're thinking, yes, there was something about Piaget here, but what was it?
What was it?
Tell me more, because it's that practice, it's the
Yeah.
doing, it's the thinking rather than just slapping a label on something. And I think, attachment, like I've mentioned a few times, attachment that virally maps, where children are cared for in a kinship system,
Yeah.
that is a wildly different perspective on attachment than in my little Italian home
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
keep everyone physically close, you know?
Hmm. And
I think we might have to print up some t-shirts that say my service, my context. Sorry, because we talk about this a lot. But I think that is really key. And how do we say this louder for the people in the back listening that, you know, exactly that point of two services may have looked at the same piece of theory, but they've interpreted it and embedded it in their service in a different
very,
way.
yeah,
And that's totally okay. No one's going to come with their clipboard and cross you off and say, no, you didn't do that bit of theory on professional love
yeah.
or circle of security or whatever it was that you guys decided to look at. No one's going to come and just put crosses. It's just, where's your starting point? How does that look like in your context? Because you're so right. Every service is so different. We've
Yeah.
got different children with different experiences, families, everything that everyone here already knows. It doesn't look the same, and that's okay.
And that's what a good segue for the second point that I was going to say. Two points,
Oh, great.
theory to practice, and the clipboard thing that you mentioned. There, it is a real fear that somebody with a clipboard will come and say that you haven't done your thing well. That's the second thing I want to talk about that we have kind of mentioned this now a few times. The educator responsibility, educator responsibilities, or educator's presence, now sometimes when in my early days when I would hear that as I would kind of translate the word responsibility into pressure.
Mm.
Educators are responsible for this, educator responsible for this, educator have tendency or potential to impact XYZ. So I would hear that as, oh, damn, I'm now, I have more tension because of these things.
Mm.
None of us are calling out educators to become a therapist. You don't have to do this alone. When I was an educator 15, 18 years ago, I was very different from what I have now. And my networking and the choices that I made about what do I engage with and who do I engage with kind of really assisted me. And till this date, I do not work alone on any concept. So I think that educators over there, those who are listening, please don't think that you have to now do all these courses to be able to have professional love. You can call us. You can share with us and say, hey, we are doing this. What do you think about it? Maybe you can teach us something. So podcast is a two-way conversation, although it looks like it's a one-way thing.
Mm.
What do you have to say about educators listening to this? And what context can they, what sort of t-shirt, what sort of context they should listen to, what all the things that we are telling them about, big things that they can work on, the next big project. Sarah, how should the educators listen to this particular podcast?
I think listening to it with people, what a great idea. I mean, I can just imagine in a staff meeting, popping a podcast on, everyone just laying down and getting comfortable and just listening together. That would be glorious. Can't do that. Maybe listening on your own and coming back together. But I think this idea of responsibility for me, same as you, Sarah, I've changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And when I started, for me, it was about making sure every child had done a piece of artwork every single day to hang on the wall, and it was all the same, because that was the proof that I was an educator. And now my priority is, did I sit with the children today and do something really amazing? Did we talk about bees and the way they're, frolicking in the flowers and the strawberries that were growing? That to me is really what my role is in early childhood. And so this idea of responsibility, I think we have a responsibility to keep thinking.
Yeah.
And I hope that doesn't scare people off, because I'm not saying doing, I'm saying thinking. We've got a responsibility to keep thinking about ideas. And I think over time, all of that thinking and all of that discussion that we have with others starts to seep in and slowly, slowly change little tiny things about our practice that when we look back over 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years, we go, actually, that was profound. And it all started because I listened to a podcast.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about the role of relationships. And I started thinking about how I connect with families. And I was thinking about consent and all the other things we've talked about tonight. And now look where we are.
And you may not even remember where it all started. And I don't know what all, as I said earlier, and we'll say it again, but in a different context. Small things are happening all the time around us. Small conversations are taking place, and that eventually constitutes to your lifelong learning of being an educator. An educator who's willing to be educated. That's how we put it in the past, and we put it again. Helen, how should people be listening to our podcast? What sort of t-shirt should they
I
wear?
mean, we keep saying when you know better, you do better. And I think, and again, like Sarah, I think you said you've been in the industry for 22 years. I've been in it for 20-ish. Sarah, you've been in it for quite a while. I don't know whether people, you don't have to take a leaf out of this book, because I think there's 3 crazy people in this room. That Saurubh just finished his PhD, Sarah's just started, and I've just gone back so I can do my master's as well. Like we're a little bit like, that
You've got
need
nothing
for
going
knowledge.
on.
It's all undiagnosed ADHD, everybody. But I think I'm not saying you've got to go to that extent of doing university study. You don't have to. But I also say, in my journey for a lifelong learner, I am always looking for those opportunities to learn new things. And I'll completely admit, I look back now in some of my early days and my thoughts and my theories around how, like Sarah, like you said, and I remember those days back in the day. You had to have your wall with all the nice little, I don't know, maybe you made owls, and then you had the 20 little owls that all sound exactly the same, and that need to come in over the top of the child and fix, you just sit that beak in the right spot and fix where it goes. And now we all know that, I mean, I know now, like, I love what I always call it, a what's in the box table, where I just throw things out and see what the children come up with, and it's messy and it's crazy, and I love that. Whereas I know 20 years ago me would have never been okay with that. But that's okay, because in this world, in this industry where we constantly critically reflect, I've learned, I've thought, I've found new ways of doing. It's being, belonging, becoming, really.
And I guess, I think that's a really good way to put it, Helen, because whilst we are learning so much, for us three, we are taking opportunities, and I'm sure many other people that we know are also doing the same. those who are listening, I hope that you listen to it as not as another course that you're doing, but maybe one or two things that you can take out of it, and then again give us your feedback on how you're finding it. But hopefully, that whilst Sarah and myself and Helen shared about our past experiences, although we never thought about talking about that today, but let's say we
Mm.
talked about our past experiences of maybe there should be a podcast on the stories about what we actually did when we were quite early on in our lives as an educator, roles of educator. But there was one thing consistent. It was professional love, wasn't it? It was always there. I always loved children. I declare, I love working with children. That's how I frame my sentence. I love working with children.
Mm.
I may not say I love children right now because that's what I've learned, how to professionally put my feelings into a language. So if you're struggling with language, maybe if you're struggling with how do I embed, how do I communicate what I am having feeling right now in my heart, how do I say that?
Mm.
Maybe we can learn to do that. Maybe you can ask Sarah Louise that question and
I did I did go off on a slight tangent, but I just want to add one thing that the point where I was going to and never got there, was that while everyone in this particular podcast today, like, too much high achieving and, as I said, undiagnosed ADHD, I think with your team, if you are getting your information from TikTok, share that TikTok video with your group. Or if I think Kylie Captain, our last one, talked about the reader piece and be the educator that made a difference. I remember when that came out years ago, sharing the YouTube clip of it with my team and saying, this is something I truly believe in. It doesn't have to be a university degree. It doesn't have to be any type of formal study. It can just be information sharing, and it can be as easy as a TikTok or a YouTube. It doesn't have to be academic. I mean, you can find really good academic stuff on, like, people explaining that academics. So yeah, I think the way we share information and discuss information as well,
why
TikToks,
not?
all that kind
All,
of stuff.
all is
We're
not
not good at making them yet, but we're going to learn one day.
all things are just knowledge and we can get it from
Mm.
anywhere. And please share the TikTok with us too. And I'm sure the reason why Helen didn't say that is because I interrupted her when she might have
No,
gotten.
no, I'd totally gone off on a tangent.
Oh,
I wasn't
okay,
ever going to
so
get
I
there.
take my blame away from it. Um, I want to again, one more time, acknowledge the importance of the time that our guests give us. And Sarah Louise, thank you for sharing so much about that. And we often say this to our guests that we will have you again. That's because 45 minutes or 50 minutes will not cover everything. There's so much that, and if we ever get challenges, one of the first word that I put, when we get challenged by trying to implement this, or when we are looking at attachment theory, or when we are trying to have a staff meeting and nobody is agreeing with it, or parents do not want XYZ thing to happen, let us know because that would actually frame or give us content to bring it back to Sarah Louise and discuss those concepts with us. What do you think about Sarah Louise of coming back to our session when you can, please?
I would love to. I'm really curious at the moment, thinking about the relationship between professional love and leadership and how we
Mm.
actually do attachment theory amongst adults. So I'd love to come back and talk about
Yeah.
that at some point.
Because
Yeah.
you're not supposed to love your colleagues.
You're not supposed to love your colleagues. You're not supposed to feel attached to them, and
Yep.
Yeah.
you're not supposed to be able to have that safe base with your
Yep.
Just
director.
don't
But
talk to
yeah,
them.
no, I think there is something there. I think there's
Yeah.
something worth exploring.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Another challenging concept, and I think that and that's why it's worth considering.
Mm.
Evolution happens in many ways, and I think this podcast could be termed as could be kind of looked upon as how are we evolving as educators? Well,
Mm.
how is our language shifting? How is some ways of thinking are being challenged, or are we going back to where we were, but this time going back with reasoning and
Mm.
rationalizing our approach? Um, that was my wrap up. That's just what I've learned today. And I want to thank you again, Sarah. I'm very conscious of the time that you've given us and also conscious of my co-host, Helen's time. Although Helen and I keep talking, maybe we'll talk after this also on a phone about something. But I want to thank you again for being here. Thank you, Helen. Is there any point that you want to say to our listeners before we say goodbye?
Before we wrap up, Sarah Louise, for those that didn't pick it up at the start, Sarah Louise is a consultant. Sarah, if they want to contact you and get more information about what you do and how people can work with you, how do they contact you?
So they can find me on Facebook, Sarah Louise Consultancy, also through LinkedIn,
Hmm.
and my website, if you Google it, Sarah Louise Consultancy.
Perfect.
Amazing. And we will also link Nicole Tallarico's book in. If you're listening and you want to find that book, we'll also link it because it's an amazing book that everybody needs to read. And actually, not just service level educators, your board, your execs, they all need to read it. So make sure that happens.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, I have said this word now 9 times. So sorry that you're listening, but this is live. We don't edit this. Sometimes we do. But have a wonderful day. Look after yourself and the people you love. From We Belong Education podcast with guests being Sarah Louise, myself, Saurabh, and Helen. It's a goodbye.
See
Thank
you
you.
later.